Good day, everyone. Good day, Snackies. This is us again. This is your oral communications teacher. With me is Mr. John Estesinas, the oral communications teacher of other sections. Okay, so today we're going to discuss communication, its elements, and intercultural communication. So let's start with what is communication. Of course, we have to define what really is communication in Tagalog or in Philippines. So when we say communication or when we say communication, it means or it came from the Latin words communis, which means to share, and communicare means commonness. Okay, when you combine the two, you are going to come up with communication means to share commonness or similarities between people whom you are going to communicate with. Moving on, if we're going to create a whole definition for communication, it's actually a process of exchange of information between two or more people. Okay? It is a process because, Sir Janla,
it is a process because we follow a certain pattern. So we will discuss that later. So meaning to say, yung communication hindi siya pwedeng mauna yung isang element then sumunod yung isang element. Kailangan masunod natin yung tamang pattern para ma-complete yung isang yung process ng communication.
correct. Okay. Another part or another important part of the definition of communication is the exchange of information. When we say exchange, of course, someone is giving and someone is taking. Okay. So it's a give and take situation. So if you give a message, someone is going to interpret it, then give feedback in return. Okay. Then another relevant aspect of this definition is, Sir Janla,
It should be between two or more people. Meaning to say, yung communication daw ay dapat may ikaw tas may kausap ka. So pwede kayong dalawa or pwedeng two or more, right? Pero may communication din tayo na pwedeng isa lang. Like you are communicating to yourself or one is communicating to like oneself, right? So meaning to say, yung ganong communication pwedeng mangyari, but it's not, the process of communication ay hindi nangyayari. So, may tinatawag tayo doon, i-discuss natin, which is yung linear communication. Mamaya, we will further explain kung ano yung pinagkaiba ng mga linear communication o yung communication kapag mag-isa ka lang or kapag walang feedback, and yung communication na when you are really interacting with other people.
correct. Okay. So, moving on. So, sabi kanina, communication comes from the Latin words communis and communicare, which means to share commonness. Okay? In where or in what aspect do we have to share commonness with? Okay? So, lagi nyo lang tandaan tong C-like or CLIKE. Okay? The acronym for culture, language, interest, knowledge, and experience. So, it's C-like. So, C-like. So let's start with culture. Sir John Locke.
Okay, so culture is very important when you are communicating with other people, especially kapag kaparehas kayo ng culture. Yun ang pinag-usapan natin dito ay yung commonness ng communication to have a better what you call this what you call this
To have a better parang encoding of the message. So parang
yes,
interpretation.
or kaya para maiwasan natin yung misunderstanding, right? So, yung culture, say for example, if ako and Miss Hampak, we have the same culture, mas magkakaintindihan kami. Like, we share the same practices, we celebrate the same yung mga celebrations, like, ano nga yung Miss Hampak, yung mga single...
National Single Day.
National Single Day. Charot lang. So, if parehas kami ng culture, mas magkakaintindihan kami, right? So, say for example, like sa mga like ako, kausap ko yung foreign people o yung mga Americans or Chinese, which is iba yung culture nila sa culture ko. Right? So, magkakaroon ng conflict. Unlike, kung kaparehas ko yung culture ng kausap ko, mas kilala ko siya, mas naiintindihan ko siya. So, nagkakaroon kami ng better understanding sa isa't isa. So, kapag parehas kami ng culture, parehas kami ng belief and practices and costumes, mas nagkakaintindihan kami.
Yes. Another
Next
example is the celebration of Christmas, diba? If you're going to compare the celebration of Christmas in the Philippines and the celebration of Christmas in the Western countries or in America, they are more on one-day celebration of it. But us, from September to the January hanggang Three Kings, Pasko pa rin sa atin. So, hindi tayo ganun magkakaintindihan. How is it na nagpapasko sila ng one day lang? Di ba bitin? Pero pag sila naman, paano kayo nagpapasko ng
Exactly.
5 buwan? Di ba masyadong mahaba yun? Di ba?
Right.
So, hindi nagkakaget. San? Okay, moving on. Number 2. Language. Okay, when we say language, of course, we have to have commonness in language. Bakit, ma'am? That's one of the most important aspect of communication, language. Kasi usually, ang communication ay pasalita. Okay? Kung hindi kayo magkaparehas ng language, paano kayo magkakaintindihan? Okay? Yung pala, minumura ka na, hindi mo pa
I will relay a message to you.
Okay, go.
Shingane mo ne.
Ano na eh?
Di mo naiintindihan.
Hindi ko naiintindihan because I only know G words.
G-words.
Hindi ko go nagaigim, tigim, tigat. So, yun,
Exactly.
di ba? If there is no commonness in language, it would be hard for you to communicate to each other because it is one of the fundamentals of communication. Okay? Kasi nga, di ba, Bisaya siya, Ilocano ka, paano na? Diba? Kaiba yung mga words na nagagamit mo. Kaya nga tayo may tinatawag na universal language, which is the English language. And sa national naman, national scope, yung Filipino. Okay? Para magkaintindihan tayo. Next.
Next one is interest. So, if the two person or two people is communicating, they communicate better if they have the same interest. Like say for example, ako, I love reading, say for example, and then yung kausap ko, he loves sports. So hindi kami masyadong how can we communicate? Ano yung pag-uusapan namin if hindi kami pareho ng interest? So wala akong alam sa sports or hindi ko gusto yung sports, and then siya naman hindi niya gusto siguro ang magbasa ng mga book. So wala kaming pag-uusapan na magja-jive kami, right? So kailangan mahalaga yung interest when we are communicating.
So, we're not saying that it is impossible, okay, or it's impossible for you to communicate with someone who have different interests than you have, okay? Ang sinasabi lang namin is that mas madali, okay? Mas madali, what they call this one, mas relatable, okay? Yung mga sasabihin mo dun sa taong yun kasi nga naiintindihan ka niya. Okay? Hindi ka niya naiintindihan. Paano na? Knowledge. Let's have knowledge na. Sige na, friend.
Alright. Next one is knowledge. So, when we say knowledge, say for the best example of this, say for example is, ang expertise ko or yung inaral kong field is medicine. And then yung kinakausap ko is architect, right? So, magkaiba kami ng nalalaman or isang example pa lang po ha. Magkaiba kami ng nalalaman. So, kapag nag-communicate kami, medyo mahihirapan kaming intindihin yung isa't isa kasi nga yung nalalaman namin ay iba sa yung nalalaman ko ay iba sa nalalaman niya and vice versa, right? So that's one example of knowledge. And another thing is yung knowledge talaga, say for example, when say for example sa interview, right? If hindi mo say for example, ako yung interviewer and then ikaw yung ini-interview, right? If hindi mo alam yung tinatanong ko, how can you answer my question? How can you continue the communication if hindi mo alam yung sinasabi? Say for example, tinanong ka, oh, what do you know about the company? Oh, hindi mo alam yung sagot kasi hindi ka kunyari nag-research. How will you continue communicating or answering the question if you don't know the answer? So that's one aspect. If you're not knowledgeable of the things that your the person you are communicating with is asking, right?
Correct. But actually, okay, in real life, it can also be an advantage, okay, pag nakikipag-communicate ka. Pagka magkaiba kayo ng nalalaman. That way, you will be able
Right.
to share what you know and he or she will be able to share what he or she knows. Diba? Mas marami, the more the merrier kayo mapag-uusapan. But it would be easier kung pareho. Okay? Parang ano lang yan kung ang naging asawa mo ay teacher at teacher ka, mas madali ka niyang maiintindihan. Okay? Mas
Ganun ba yun?
matutulungan ka
Sampa?
niya. Pero kung hindi, ayun. Ayun lang.
Alright.
Turuan mo siyang mag-check. Tsaka,
Mukhang,
wala tayong, wag mo na mag-asawa, mga bata pa kayo. Okay, moving on. Experience. Okay. Siyempre, when we say commonness, hindi mawawala yung sa experience. Okay? For example, meron ka nakilala, kaibigan mo. Ang gusto mong topic, nagpunta kayo sa amusement park. Ang pinag-uusapan, what you call this one, ang sinasabi mo sa kanya, gaano kakatakot na sumakay uli ng roller coaster. Kasi nung nakaraan mong sakay, halos masuka-suka ka. At kung halos gumewang-gewang ka na dyan, okay? Pero hindi siya makarelate kasi hindi pa siya nakaka-try sumakay ng roller coaster. For example, si Janla, nakasakay na yun na roller coaster. Ako, hindi pa. So kapag nagkikwento siya about sa anong experience ng roller coaster, hindi ko alam. Feeling ko ang dali, pero hindi pa. Okay? So
hindi
parang
naman talaga.
hindi ako
Joke.
makarelate. Hindi ako makarelate. Okay? Ano pa? Ano pa ba? For experience. Another
Say
one.
for example, ay,
Sige na.
sorry.
Sige na.
Okay, say for example, yung, kunyari, ako na heartbroken, right?
Parang nakaka-relate ako.
Bawal. And then si Miss Sampa, single siya throughout her life.
Parang uy, grabe!
Real story. Joke lang. Alright. So, kapag kunyari nagkwento ako ng naranasan ko, ng pain na naramdaman ko kay Miss Sampa, right? So, wala siyang idea talaga kung ano yung pakiramdam. Right? Kasi hindi pa niya pa talaga naranasan magkaroon ng kunyari ng kasintahan.
True to life.
So, medyo mahirap siyang makarelate or mahirapan siya makipag-communicate sa akin kasi hindi niya alam hindi niya naranasan, hindi niya alam yung pangyayari, right? So, medyo mahihirapan kami makapag-communicate sa isa't isa. Unlike kung na-heartbroken ako and siya na-heartbroken din. So, makakapagbigay siya ng advice na mas maganda, right? Pero, hindi naman talaga as in mangyayari yun. I mean, we can remedy that kind of situation or problem by empathizing others, right? O yung nararamdaman ng isang tao by putting ourselves into the shoes of that person, right?
Empathize.
So, yes.
Okay? Parang ano ba yan? Yung parang naiiyak-iyak na siya, jiyak-jiyak na siya. Sabi, hindi ko kaya. Iniwan niya ako. Tapos ako, ay we, ganun lang. Pero talaga ba? Ganun lang. Kasi nga hindi ko naiintindihan. Okay, moving on. So yun nga, huwag niyong kalimutan si like. Okay? Moving on.
Like.
Okay. So how does communication works? Paano nga ba ito nangyayari? Paano to nasasakatuparan? And Sir Janda,
Okay,
paki-explain.
okay. A lot of things in this world ay may kanya-kanyang process na sinusunod kapag ginagawa natin, right? Katulad na lang ang pagsasaing, right? Kapag nagsaing tayo, hindi mo naman basta isasalang mo bago mo huhugasan. Hindi naman
True.
pwedeng ganon.
Uy, baka may ganun ha. Ang lasa ng
Ay,
kanin.
talaga ba?
Baka may ganun. Baka, ano ba yung lasa ng kanin?
Alright. So, may process tayo. Siyempre, huhugasan mo muna yung tatakalin mo yung bigas, right? Tapos nalagay sa hindi, rice cooker, and then huhugasan. Tapos yun na, gano'n. Tapos bago isasalang, right? So, ganun din yung communication. We have the process that we need to follow. So, what are those?
So, we
So,
got,
we have first the sender, message, channel, receiver, and feedback. So for sender, pag sinabi nating sender, this is the source of the communication. So sa kanya talaga unang nanggagaling yung message or sa kanya nag-start yung communication. When the sender encodes a message, right? Yung message, it could be a thought, it could be an idea, or it could be an information, or a simple gestures. Yung mga non-verbal natin like pakindat-kindat, right? Wave, wave, like, ganon, finger heart, pwedeng mga ganyan, right? Or yung mga other non-verbal cues like mga mannerisms natin, it has meaning, right? So, yun yung tinatawag nating message. Next one is the channel. So, when we say channel, this is the medium of the message, right? Okay? Yes, Ms. Sampak?
so when we say
Next.
channel, this is how we actually deliver the message. Ano bang ginamit nating way para maibigay natin yung gusto nating mensahe dun sa sa taong gusto nating makausap. Okay? For example, kay crush, gumamit ka ba ng love letter? Gumamit ka ba ng Facebook Messenger? Gumamit ka ba ng FaceTime? Gumamit ka ba ng, ano ba isa?
Phone.
TikTok. TikTok. Para mag-confess pa TikTok. Yun yung channel na tinatawag. Anong ginamit mo? O pwede din namang, what you call this one? Personal. Okay, personal mo sinabi. Ano pa ba yung mga ibang ways? Kinanta mo. Pinakita mo lang. Diba? Sabi nga, action speaks louder than words. Yung pala, hindi naman pala niya naiintindihan. Kala niya friends lang. It really hurts. Char. Okay. So that's channel, ha? Yung paraan niyo kung paano niyo ipapahayag yung inyong thoughts, ideas, and feelings. Moving on
Next
to
one is receiver. So when we say receiver, ito yung recipient ng message ng sender, right? So he or she will decode the message of the sender or the source, right? And then the next one is feedback. Feedback is actually the reply of the receiver to the sender, right? It's the message of the receiver to the sender. And another element before we move on, before we forget this element, is the noise or what we call the interference, right, Ms. Sampak?
correct, okay? When we say noise, it's not just all about something that we hear, okay? Or something that our sense of hearing perceives, okay? Pag sinabi nating noise, iba't iba yan. Hindi, not necessarily bagay na tumunog at narinig mo, kaya na-distract ka, okay? Ano-ano yung mga yun? Let's see. So, ito yung mga kinds of noises. We got physiological, psychological, physical, and natural. Okay, let's start with physiological. Sir John Locke.
Okay, so when we say physiological noise, this is actually our needs, right? Sometimes when we are communicating, we'll listen to our body first. Kailangan natin mga sinisignal ng ating body. If gutom ka, if naaantok ka, if nauuhaw ka, or tinatawag ka ng ng
Tawag ng kama,
nakali
antok na antok ka na,
oo,
'di ba?
right? So that is physiological kasi hindi ka makakapag-communicate ng maayos if gutom ka. That's one
Correct.
fact, right?
Mm.
Kasi hindi ka rin makakapag-communicate ng maayos if inaantok ka, right? So, kailangan nating makinig sa katawan natin, yung needs ng ating katawan para tayo makapag-communicate ng maayos sa ating kausap. So, that is physiological noise.
Okay, next, number two. Psychological. When we say psychological, it's more on the mental state of the person who is going to communicate to another person. Ito naman yung parte kung saan unstable yung iyong mental state. Kung ikaw ay depressed, stressed, bothered, problematic, dito napapasok yung psychological noise. Okay? Sometimes, yung mga sinasabi natin, mami-misinterpret ng iba kasi hindi natin siya na ipahayag ng maayos kasi nga bothered tayo. Hindi tayo focused, okay? Masyado tayong maraming iniisip. Anxious tayo at marami pang iba. Ngayon, yan yung medyo nararanasan natin ngayong pandemya. Kasi nga pandemic, maraming iniisip. Pagkain bukas, assignment bukas, paano ipiprint yung module, paano ipiprint yung ganito, paano kukuha ng module, okay? So marami tayong iniisip. Kaya minsan yung mensahe natin hindi natin na re-relay ng maayos. Kaya yung iba ha? Di ko gets. Ulit nga. Diba? So, yun yung mahirap doon, okay, sa psychological. Kasi ang kalaban mo yung iyong mental state. Kaya kayo ay stay strong lang during this pandemic. Okay? Next.
All right, next one is physical noise. So when we say physical, it refers to our body or yung physical aspect ng ating sarili, right? So papasok dito if you have hearing impairment, right? Kapag may problem ka sa pandinig, mahihirapan kang makipag-communicate kasi part ng communication ang listening, right? So, medyo mahihirapan ka doon. Another one is kapag ang kausap mo ay mute. Say, for example, since ang way ng pakipag-communicate ng mga mute is through sign language. Alright. Medyo mahihirapan kang makipag-communicate sa kanya kasi nga may physical disability yung tao. Right? So, iyon yung tinatawag nating physical noise.
Okay. Moving on to the cultural noise. When we say cultural noise, kanina nga sabi nga natin, you have to have commonness with culture so that the communication process will actually flourish. Yung parang mas magiging maganda, mas magiging tuloy-tuloy. So sabi natin, meron tinatawag na cultural noise. Ibig sabihin kung magkaiba kayo ng culture, mahihirapan kayong intindihin yung isa't isa kasi nga mayroong existing knowledge, may existing kayong pinaniniwalaan. Kaya pag may nakarinig kayo na, kami nga pag humihigop ng sabaw, may tunog pa eh. Di ba? Parang,
exactly, right?
Mali yun. Bastos yun sa amin, sa culture namin. May ganon, di ba? So,
sa
medyo
Japan, actually.
mahihirapan tayo.
Sa Japan,
sige,
sa Japan, pag humigop ka ng tea or basta ng sabaw, that means to say na may tunog, ibig sabihin nagugustuhan mo. Pero pag dito sa Pilipinas, pag higop ka ng sabaw, galit yung nanay mo. Right.
Malakas kasi masama raw. Okay? Bastos daw sa pagkain. So, yun yung tinatawag nating cultural noise na hindi kasi kayo magkapareha ng kung ano yung alam. Okay? Or kung ano yung pinapractice sa inyong mga pamilya, sa inyong bahay, sa inyong nation. Kaya doon lang pumapasok yung cultural. Maidagdag ko lang din yung environmental noise. Okay? Environmental noise. Forgive us, di namin na idagdag dyan. Pero yung environmental noise, ito na yung sinasabi ko kanina, sounds. Okay? Ito na yung naririnig natin. Yung parang sinabi ng mama mo, hoy, bumili ka ng yelo. Okay.
Tapos nag-online class ka.
Tapos online class ka. Akala ng teacher mo, huy, bumili ka daw kay Belo. Ha? bumili lang ng yelo kasi dumaan. Ang nangyari kasi, dumaan yung truck ng basura. Okay? Yun yung environmental noise na nag-pop up na ganun. Okay? Surab, surab! Gumanon. Distract ka, kaya ayun, nagkaroon tayo ng environmental